Today I'm building my largest project to date, an L-shaped desk. For the desktop I used some planed all over sapele or sapele, whatever you want to call it, and even though they call it planed all over, it rarely is. So I have to joint the edges that will be glued together in the panel. My jointer is too small to run these long pieces through, so I used the track saw, placed it on the seams and ripped through the seam to get nice flat edges on the pieces. Once I had a clean glue line on each piece, I put some dominoes in to help with gluing up the panel. If you're the kind of person who gets angry when they see festival stuff from woodworking videos, my apologies, but also get a grip, will ya? I did the exact same steps on the second desktop and glued it together the next day. Once the glue had dried on both panels, I could cut the desktops to their final width using the track saw. Something I started to do at this stage was to cut at 3 different depths so that the saw wouldn't get bogged down on the thick hardwood. For the connection for the two desktops, I decided to go with a mitered cut as opposed to a butt joint. I think that the desktop cut at 45 degrees looks much better, and from what I could see online, it's also better for wood movement. To join the desktops together, I used worktop bolts. Something about gluing them together made me fearful that they might not fit in the back of my car when it came to delivery day. The worktop bolts are really easy to install on the underside, and you just need to drill a hole on each side and route a channel to each hole. When the channels and holes are done, the worktop can be held together using clamps and the bolts can be tightened with a spanner. I didn't get footage of it, but I also added some dominoes which made connecting and keeping the panels aligned much easier. There was a slight overhang in the far corner of the miter that can be trimmed off using a track saw to get a perfect 90 degree. The tops can be cut to their final lengths, which were 1400 and 1200 mm. I wanted to make my own grommet for the cables to pass through, so I decided to turn an 80mm template on the lathe. On the piece that would become the grommet, I routed a section for the cables to pass through using a 19mm bit. I lined up the template with the markings on the board and stuck it down using double-sided tape. I also managed to get this really clear footage of me trimming the excess off on the bandsaw as well. Bit of an disclosure here, this might not be the safest thing I've ever done. I used a template bit to get a final shape for the grommet. If you do this yourself, make sure that you turn your router to its slowest speed setting, as it's easier to control and having your fingers mangled with a router bit might be slightly inconvenient. Last step for the grommet was to put a very slight round over on the edges. For the hole in the desktop, I drilled an undersized hole with a Forstner bit and then used a plywood template with a 60mm hole that was drilled on the drill press to get a cleaner hole. Once the hole was finished, I added a 10mm rebate on top so that the grommet would sit in place. For the base of the desk, I decided to have a cabinet on one side and a leg on the other. I decided to make the leg from sapele and just went with a simple frame. The frame could be cut to length on the table saw using a miter gauge and cutting at a 45 degree angle. I used dominoes to reinforce the connections and glued the frame together using a bang clamp. Once the glue had dried, I sanded the legs to clean up the glue squeeze out, and I put a 3mm round over along the outside of the leg. For the far edge of the miter connection on the desktop, I was worried that it might not be supported enough from the ends, so I made a really simple straight leg. I glued 2 offcuts together and cut it to length on the crosscut sled. I routed a channel for figure of 8 fasteners, which would make it easy to connect to the underside, and it would also help with wood movement. I managed to get some really nice oak veneered MDF for the cabinet. I read a lot online saying that it wouldn't be stable enough for a cabinet, but I don't think that's the case at all. I also didn't really fancy selling a liver just to get a nice bit of veneered plywood. I cut the panels to width and then cross cut the panels at a 45 degree. I think it's the best way to make a cabinet from MDF or ply, because you can hide the faces that will be visible with edge banding or solid wood. I should have used the loose setting on the opposite sides of each connection on the cabinet, but that'll become clear during the glue up. In the cabinet, I decided to split the cabinet in two with a divider so that I could have a section with drawers and a shelf on the other side. I should have applied the edge banding before cutting each panel to size, but you live and learn. It's really easy to apply the edge banding with an iron, which was bought specifically for this purpose and has never been used to iron clothes. The excess edge banding could be trimmed off using a specific tool, but I just used a chisel to shave it off. This glue up was an experience to say the least. Like I said earlier, the dominoes on the tight setting didn't really help me here. If you are ever struggling with a glue up like this though, I'd recommend breathing exercises and a meditative state. I did not do either of those things, and I've left the audio of me struggling to get it together so that you can see the mental state that I was in.
Get in your No! Fuck off!
By some divine miracle, I got the cabinet together and also got an intense workout and a crippling desire for 12 pints in the process. The next day, with a severe hangover, I was able to take the clamps off the cabinet and sand any glue squeeze out. I also drilled the holes for shelf pins using a jig and some ply offcuts to make sure that they're all aligned perfectly. I made really simple drawer boxes using birch plywood. When cutting the width of the pieces, the back panel of each box should be cut slightly smaller to allow the bottoms to sit in place. I used pocket holes to join all the boxes together. I put a rebate on each piece except for the back pieces. It's a good idea to keep the fence in place from when the back pieces are trimmed so that the rebate for the bottoms will sit exactly in place. The drawer bottoms are cut to final size on the cross cut and the boxes can be screwed together. The bottom can slide into place and then can be secured in place with a screw or a nail gun. For the drawer fronts, I got really lucky and got a thick piece with some really nice sapwood on one of the edges, so I decided to make the fronts from a book match panel. The piece is cut in half using a table saw and a bandsaw, and then very lightly planed on the front facing sides and glued together. Once the glue dries, the squeeze out can be cleaned up and sanded smooth. I went with easy close slides for the drawers and installed them in the cabinet using offcuts cut to size so that they were installed at the same height and evenly spaced throughout the cabinet. I used offcuts to do the same for installing the runners perfectly centered on the drawer boxes. I cut the panel to size and tested the fit in the cabinet, and then cut the panel into the 3 drawer fronts, maintaining the flow of the grain. I decided to make my own drawer pulls because I was too cheap to buy them. I cut some solid oak at a slight angle on the table saw and then cut them to size at the miter gauge with the same angle that was used on the length. It's easier to install drawer fronts if you have pulls, so I drilled the holes for the pulls at this stage. I wanted the cabinet to have a floating look also, so I made a quick frame from sapele to sit under the cabinet and raise it from the floor. Making the frame from sapele was a complete waste, as you can only see the riser if you're standing about 3 foot away from the table, but again, you live and learn. I also kept an offcut from the frame to use as a spacer between the desk and cabinet. I cut it smaller than the width of the cabinet and cut a 45-degree on one end. I wanted a contrast of the cabinet and the desktop, so I decided to stain the oak cabinet and drawer pulls black. Once the black stain had dried, I applied white Rubio over the stain to give the cabinet a ceruse look. The drawer fronts got a coat of Rubio Pure. To install the drawer fronts and pulls, the easiest method is to screw panhead screws into the fronts to hold them in place, and then take out the drawers and add more screws to the inside of the drawer. The screws that were in place for the pulls can be taken out, and then the pulls can be screwed from the inside of the box. The frame is just screwed directly into the cabinet, as it's just MDF to plywood connecting, so I'm not concerned about movement. For the desktop to the cabinet and legs, threaded inserts are a better option. I screwed the spacer in temporarily into the cabinet and then drilled oversized holes for the bolts. I could then place the desktop on top of the spacer, clamp it in place, and place the same drill bit through the holes to mark the underside of the desktop for where the threaded inserts need to be installed. It's important to use countersinks on the holes for the inserts so that they sit flush. The inside of the cabinets needed a larger hole to be drilled roughly halfway through to let the head of the bolt sit in. For the frame leg, I followed pretty much the exact same steps to connect it to the underside of the desktop. I sanded the desktop from 80 to 240 grit and added a 3mm round over to the top and moved on to the final touches. Like the drawer fronts, I use Rubio Pure on the desktop and legs. I added my logo to a grommet as well, just for a bit of free marketing, and glued the threaded inserts in place. I'll leave you with some shots of the finished desk and would ask that if you took something from the video, leave a like on the video, and if you've somehow managed to last the entire length of the video unmuted, surely you could subscribe to my channel for future videos. Thanks for watching.